Scatter plots with straight lines. Why do the slope and the y-intercept of a line of best fit signify on a graph? Well, let's take a look at what those things are. First of all, let's talk about what a slope is. We have to remember that slope represents rise over run, that it's a fraction. It can be positive or it can be negative. And what it does is it kind of gives us the angle of the line. Well, this will help us to tell a story in the scatter plot. Now, a y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. And that's going to give us a starting point in our scatter plot analysis. Now, the line of best fit is what we're really going to talk about today, and how all of this is tied together, how this helps us to project and look at trends. Okay, so let's take a look at some information here. If the data points on a scatter plot show an association, you can draw a straight line that models the general trend of the data. This line of best fit or trend line will probably not fit all the data points exactly. However, if the line you draw is a good fit, it will be close to most of the data points. Note, do not consider outliers when drawing a trend line. It's important for us not to consider an outlier because an outlier is a special case, and a special case doesn't happen all the time. Now we're going to take a look here at this graph, and this graph here talks about sponsors and amount raised. Well, if we can kind of analyze the graph just by looking at it, we see that on the y-axis, the amount raised in dollars, and it's jumping by 40 each time. And then on the x-axis, the number of sponsors, and here it's jumping by 2. We kind of notice as things are going along, as the number of sponsors is going along, the amount raised in dollars is actually rising as well. So we know that this is a positive association. Now, we can now at this point draw ourselves a trend line. Now remember, a trend line is a good fit for the data if there are about the same number of points above the line as there are below the line. So we're going to draw ourselves a line in here. And here we see this line that I've drawn, and it's got about the same amount of dots above the line. We're not going to consider this point out here because that's our outlier. Now what we need to do is find a couple of places where the graph crosses close to a corner. And what do I mean by a corner? Well, what I mean by a corner is this. Let me kind of make this a little bit larger here so you can see what I'm talking about. When the line goes through, if this can go right through a corner on the graph, not here or not there, but if it goes there, we can use that to help us count our rise over run. So that's what we're going to do. So I've got these 2 points here. So when I check that, I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll have positive 4 on the rise, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, positive 6 on the run. So when I'm looking at this, if I take those numbers and convert it to a slope, I would get 4 divided by 6. Now I'd have to reduce that as well. So I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 2, and I kind of find out that 2/3 is my slope. Now what does that mean? That's the slope of the trend line above, but what does it really represent in the big scheme of things? Well, we're going to kind of put some things together here. We know that everything is based on rise over run, and again we have this slope of 2/3 that we're using. Well, that rise of 2 represents money that was raised. The run, the X part here, the 3 we have, is going to represent the number of sponsors. Now what we can do is we can take this and expand upon it, because really we found this slope by counting the boxes, but the reality is these boxes don't increase by 1, they increase by varying amounts. For example, if we look on the x-axis, we can see that there's a change of 2 each time. On the y-axis, there's a change of 40. So we need to take these numbers into account when we're talking about slope. So to get what it really means, every 2 boxes, well, every box is worth 40. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply 2 times 40, and with the run, every 3 boxes, and since every box on the run is worth 2, I'm going to multiply it times 2. That's going to give me a new slope that actually is more reflective of this graph. 2 times 40 is 80, and 3 times 2 is 6. And so what this is saying is that for every 6 sponsors that I have, I can raise $80. So if we were to write that in words, let me type it in here for us. So for every 6 sponsors, $80 more are raised. And so that kind of gives us an explanation how the trend line can help us to predict things. We can say, well, if I had only 20 people invited to my event, how much money could I expect to raise? I could expect to raise about $220, and so on. So our trend line will help us to make projections and make predictions. And that's really what we're trying to learn to do today, is take this scatter plot data and learn to make predictions with it. Let's take a look at one more graph. Here I have pages in a novel and how many times that novel's been checked out from the library. Well, we notice that as the novel gets larger, more and more pages, the less likely it is to be checked out from the library. We do have an outlier up there, this one out here, that could be something like Hunger Games or Twilight. But we know that we need to get a line of best fit in here. So let's put that in there. Now, we notice that as the pages go along, as the pages get more and more, the times checked out from the library less and less. So that's a negative association. So that means our slope is going to be negative as well. So we've got to keep that in mind. So here we go, and we're going to count to make our slope, because again, that helps us to figure out what all of this represents. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 going down, and I'll put a negative there, and 1, 2, 3 across. So our slope this time represents -4 divided by 3. And once again, we have to know, what do these things represent? This is going to represent times checked out, and that 3 is going to represent pages in a novel. Now we know that that's not true, 3 and -4, because these are being multiplied by something. So we can see that times checked out changes by 2, and that the pages in the novel changes by 40. So what we're going to do is make sure that we multiply the right numbers with the right numbers from their axes. And that's going to give us a new slope that can explain something a little more. So -4 times 8 is, -2 is -8, and 3 times 40 is 120. So if we have to explain what this means, all we would have to do is we can say for every 120 pages in a novel, 8 less people will check it out. So let's write that up. For every 120 pages added to a novel, 8 less people will check out. Or I should not say less people, it's 8 less times, right? 8 less times that book will be checked out from the library. Let me get that up there so you can see it. Okay, so that kind of explains that a little bit more. Now we can do some other analysis by looking at this trend line. We can take a look and say, we wanted to make a projection. If there was a 360-page novel, would we expect it to be checked out 20 times? Well, if we take a look at our trend line here at 360, if we go up to there and look at 360, we see that a novel that's got 360 pages is probably going to be checked out 5 times. So to expect it to be checked out 20 times or 40 times would be unrealistic. And we use our trend line to show us what is going on. And the word trend itself means something that is happening, that is occurring. It's going in that direction. Now, one other thing to think about is writing an equation of a line based on this information so that more things can be investigated. We have to remember, let me kind of go down here a little bit, we have to remember our equation for a line, y equals mx plus b, where m represents the slope of the line, and the y-intercept is represented by this letter b. If we take these two pieces of information, we can tie it together and write ourselves an equation and see what's going on. So we have our slope -4/3, so I could write an equation of this line. y equals -4/3 x. Now, I need to know what the y-intercept is, so I'm going to take a look at the graph here. And I notice that I'm going off my chart. If I extend this continually up and kind of project what it's going to run into, it's probably going to start at about 24. So what does the y-intercept tell me? Well, the y-intercept tells me that a book on average may get checked out 24 times. The smaller, an average checkout is about that. And as things progress, it starts getting less and less and less and less and less. So this kind of equation can help us write the trend line so that we can plug in approximations. We can get estimates. We can do the estimates algebraically without doing it on a graph. We can plug in 200 pages for X, right? The pages in the novel, find out how many times that's going to be taken out of the library. So that's how we're going to use that as well. So hopefully this explains how to use straight lines and with scatter plots, and how to get more information out of your scatter plot and do predictions. Because if we can't do predictions, there's no point in doing a scatter plot. That's what gathering the data does for us. Gives us information and helps us to make predictions.